I want you to sit deep in that value of inexperience, because when we don't know everything, when we don't know how to get something done, and we are willing to be open to how it's going to turn out and see the entire experience as an opportunity to learn and grow and perfect, it completely changes the situation. It changes the feel, it changes the outcome, it changes the energy, because you're not worried about perfection. On this week's episode of The Rutledge Perspective, we're finishing up January, where I talked a lot about the different versions and definitions of value. And although this podcast is going to release in February, I want to wrap up because I just got back from the ROI Summit in Puerto Rico, and there was a moment of really great insight that came that I want to share with all of you as we wrap up this idea of value. I'm going to have a couple other things that are going to be in subsequent episodes that I think are they're things that I'm sure stick in your craw, and they absolutely stick in mine, but let's stick to value. So I went to Puerto Rico last week. Whenever you're listening to this podcast, this is in 2023 and January 2023. And it was for a week-long summit put on by Rachel Rogers and her team, and all about personal development. And Rachel Rogers is the woman who wrote We Should All Be Millionaires. And it was fantastic. And I had to get myself ready. So for those of you who are listening, who are that introvert, as I told people, I present as an extrovert. I'm extroverted when I need to be, but I really need that time by myself to kind of recharge. And so I had gone in with the intention of doing as much as I could, but also honoring my energy. And right before I left, literally the week before, I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to be in Puerto Rico. I don't have to rearrange the podcast and the radio show. I can actually do my first pop-up that I'd been talking about in 2022. So I thought, I'm just going to do that. And of course, then the week got away from me. I didn't get a chance to really manage it with the hotel and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, you know what? But we're still going to do this. And so the hotel, of course, when they heard radio show, they're thinking big crew, they're thinking all this stuff. And then you have to talk to marketing and salespeople. And I'm a rules follower. And so I could have just done it, just popped up in the lobby with my stuff, right? My microphone and my laptop and my camera and all this kind of stuff. But I'm like, you know what? Let me just be forthright. And then you go through the whole loop. And I thought, forget it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to do this thing and I'll find another place to do it. So the radio show was live on Tuesday morning, and I believe that was the 24th. And you can catch that episode on my YouTube channel, The Rutledge Perspective. So if you go onto YouTube, my channel is called The Rutledge Perspective, so at The Rutledge Perspective. And I ended up, at first, I tried to go outside. So I was talking to my producer, and we're like, we're going to connect about 15 minutes ahead of time and just make sure everything's working. So I had gone down to the fourth level deck, which was where they had an infinity pool, and there were high top tables, because I had forgotten, because proper prior planning prevents poor performance, but I had forgotten my stand that I could sit the camera on and everything. So I was looking for a high top table so I could get the camera up high enough. So on my laptop. So I went down to this deck, called Jerry, and she was like, wait, it's really, really loud. Now, the airport was close to, my hotel was right at the convention center, and there was like a small private airstrip not too far from that. So it was just loud, and it was windy and all these kind of things. And so it was about a quarter till, and I'm thinking, oh man, this isn't going to work. What am I going to do? I guess I'm going to have to go to my balcony. And I happened to look into the bar. So it was, if you guys have been to, hotels at some of these islands and quote unquote resort kind of hotels, there's always this like bar area, right? That's open. And so it was about noon Puerto Rico time, because they were 2 hours ahead. It was about noon, and I happened to look over this bar, and I saw these big tubs, right, of popcorn. And I had been in my room earlier, and I'm like, the desk is low, everything's low, and I want to be out on my balcony, and there's a table, but how am I going to do that? I mean, all these things are going through my head. And I saw this thing of popcorn. I thought, that could work as a stand. I should have taken a picture of it. That could work as a stand. Should have taken a picture of my whole setup, and I didn't. And So I pulled the popcorn thing. I told Jerry I'd call her back, ran back up to my room. And on the balcony of my room were two like balcony chairs, like you would see, and a little side table that was kind of short. And then inside my room was a beautiful round kind of bedside table, not the kind built into the wall, but a separate bedside table. And so my wheels started turning. I thought, okay, let me take the bedside table outside. I'm going to stick the balcony table on top of that. And then I'm going to put the popcorn thing on top of that, right? So I had like this pyramid. And then I set my computer on with my camera on and did the show. So it was on the balcony. You could see the water behind me. You could see the buildings. It was still a little windy, but it wasn't quite as loud. And you could hear the planes going by, all the things. And as I was doing it, it was such a pleasure to do this show. And my first pop-up and being in Puerto Rico that I hadn't been to Puerto Rico in over 20 years. And just the experience was so great. And after I got done with the show, and I also did this podcast live that Wednesday from the convention center on a high table. And I got done with the show and said, okay, that wasn't bad. I really, really enjoyed doing that. Wednesday, I got ready to do the podcast and I was like, okay, here we go. I'm in the middle of sessions. This next session, I'm not going to worry about going to because I really want to do this pop-up podcast. But where am I going to do it? I don't want to do it on my balcony again. So let me go into the convention center. And they had these high tables because they were doing brain dates. So you could do this high table with these beautiful yellow chairs and all the things. And so I said, well, I'll just go down there and do it. Now, again, it's a convention center. So big and cavernous, right? And lots of people chit-chatting, lots of things. But I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I had my microphone, I had my webcam, everything ready. I stood at the high top table and recorded my podcast. And it was okay, right? I could hear the noise too. And I'm like, well, hopefully it's okay live and people can still hear me. But I had so much fun that I was there and able to share the moment with you guys. And that's when the value thing popped up. And it's all about the value of imperfection. The value of imperfection. So I had never done a pop-up before. I hadn't really planned the way I wanted to plan because I was running, just trying to get ready to go to this thing. I wasn't sure where I could go or what would work. I mean, I had no experience in how to do a pop-up. Didn't know what the audio was going to sound. Nothing. I knew nothing except that I had technology. I had a hotspot, right? I could do all those things, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And yet, some of the greatest comments I've gotten, some of the best feedback I've gotten, all of those things have come from these really imperfect, out of the blue, sitting on top of popcorn boxes, live broadcasts. It was so imperfect, right? It was so imperfect. I was trying to get the light right. And it was so imperfect. And yet I had a blast. That energy came through the work that I was doing and the presence that I had on camera, right? And on the station. And it was a great learning opportunity for me. So, we see all those memes. It's not failure. It's a learning opportunity. This wasn't something big. This wasn't anything I would even remotely consider a failure, but it wasn't perfect, right? I didn't have the perfect setup. I didn't have the right things behind me. I didn't have all of the things that had I planned in detail, I would have had. I would have had a different space for the podcast that wasn't quite as cavernous, or I would have found a spot in the convention center and said, hey, I'm going to go over here to this corner and do this so I can still have the light, but I'm away from all the people. It just didn't dawn on me, right? And with time and pressure. And so for all of you who are listening to this week for this podcast episode, it's the value that you find in doing something imperfectly, right? The value of imperfection. When everything is perfect and buttoned up and with no flaws, it is easy not to appreciate the beauty of the thing in its entirety. It's easy to miss the little things when everything is perfect, right? When everything is perfect, it's easy to miss the little things. And when everything is perfect, it's kind of like I used to say, I would work with some of these leaders that everything was like the shiny apple. It was beautiful. It was the thing you would see. It was a piece of art, right? It was shiny, it was red, it was beautiful. You just wanted to take a bite out of this apple. What you didn't know is the apple was full of worms. You didn't know what people were doing, right? Like social media, we always see everybody's highlight reel. We very rarely see what's behind the scenes. Well, you guys got to see a little bit of the behind the scenes because it was kind of all over the place, right? And again, the imperfection, the value of the imperfection is in the learning. So now I know next time, man, Laurel, remember to take behind the scenes. Remember to take a picture of your setup because I just don't think about pictures, y'all. I just don't. Mainly because I don't necessarily love to be on camera, but I just don't think about taking pictures all the time. But now with these pop-ups, I know that is a real key piece of being able to share the experience with you guys, to be able to see what it looks like to try to maneuver to make a radio show and a podcast happen outside of your norm. And so as you go through and finish up kind of this January and move through the rest of the year and think about value, what value you put on things, not allowing someone else to tell you what your value is. Understanding that the exchange that you are looking for is for the value of the services you are delivering, right? The value of your expertise and your experience. And that there is value for you in showing up imperfectly, in making those errors, and being a beginner at something. There's great value that comes from that. One of the sessions, Rachel Rogers talked about the difference between qualifications and experience, right? Or qualifications and expertise. And I'm going to get into that in a different podcast episode because it really ties into something I've been talking about on this value, that there is value still in experience. And I'm going to talk about that on a later episode. But this value too of inexperience is just masterful, right? I want you to sit deep in that value of inexperience, because when we don't know everything, when we don't know how to get something done, and we are willing to be open to how it's going to turn out and see the entire experience as an opportunity to learn and grow and perfect, it completely changes the situation. It changes the feel, it changes the outcome, it changes the energy, because you're not worried about perfection. I knew that radio show was going to have some issues, right? That some people may not be able to hear, that planes were going to fly. I knew it was going to be interesting. It was not even close to being a hot mess. Like my initial gut reaction is my type A insecure overachiever, right? It wasn't nearly a hot mess. And it was a lot of fun. Take that inexperience, that imperfection, and turn it into your opportunity to learn and to grow and to perfect your craft, to figure out how you want to show up. I can't wait for my next pop-up. Maybe California. I just had somebody say, come to Atlanta. I'm going to be all over the place. Y'all are going to get sick of me. You hear me? You're going to get sick of me just popping up places and saying, come join me for the radio show or the podcast. But in the meantime, I want you to seize the opportunity that comes to you through the imperfection. Move in imperfection. Move forward. Take action knowing that imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. Just do it imperfectly. Figure out what's going on. Figure out how to do it safely and to the best of your ability with what you do know. But it's that idea of being quick and approximate versus slow and precise. Just do it. I knew that the worst that could happen was I would have some technology glitches. I wouldn't be able to find a place. Worst case scenario, I'd sit in my room with the door closed. It wouldn't be great, but it would still be on air and I'd still be in Puerto Rico. It just wouldn't be what I wanted it to be. And while I didn't have people around me like I really wanted and things like that, it is something that now I know how I want to do it a little bit differently, right? Maybe getting some things out early enough so there's some people who can show up. I can invite some guests to come and hang out with me at a coffee shop or something and do the podcast or radio show from there. So seize the value in imperfection. It's all about perspective, y'all. That's why I call this the Rutledge perspective. Shift your perspective, shift your circumstances. That imperfection has value in it. It has learning in it. It has data and insight in it that gives you the ability to continue to move forward towards the goal you say you want. So, thank you for those of you who joined me live on the radio show and on the podcast from Puerto Rico. Thank you. Thank you, Puerto Rico. Thank you, Rachel Rogers and team, for an amazing ROI summit there. It just all came together. And I am so grateful that I had the God wink to say, you know what, you don't have to cancel anything. Just go do it, pop up. And I'm glad I had the courage to do it, that I know myself well enough to know that sometimes I have to just not think about it and just do. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Sometimes you can think yourself out of something and you need to just do. Have a fantastic week. Thank you for tuning in to the Rutledge Perspective. Please share this with somebody you think would get some value out of it. Go out to your favorite podcast platform, give us a 5-star review, send me a DM and let me know where you think I should show up for a pop-up, but what are some other things you'd like me to talk about? Going into February, Love Month, Black History Month, Heart Health Month, we're going to be talking about a lot of things around value, around health, around history, around vision, those kind of things. So join me and continue to download and listen. I appreciate every single one. And DM me with your thoughts. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye. You have been listening to the Rutledge Perspective podcast. Thank you so much for downloading and for connecting. You can find previous episodes of the podcast on my website at laurelrutledge.com/podcast. You can also find me on social media at Laurel K. Rutledge and/or The Rutledge Perspective. And I'd love your perspective on the things we talk about. And if there's a specific topic you want me to cover, just let me know. And please share this podcast with someone in your village who may need this little piece of perspective today. And if you're so inclined, I would really appreciate a 5-star rating and review on the platform of your choice. Apple Podcasts and Spotify reviews are particularly helpful. Thank you again for listening. Take care.